me turn next to Dan Tarlock. Dan has taught natural resources and environmental law for a number of years, and he comes to us from Chicago.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here among such a distinguished and dedicated group of people. I'm a lawyer. I'm an environmental lawyer. And so I want to talk about the relationship between law and the Moral Economy Project. And there are two levels to this relationship, as very nicely set out in the last presentation. There's the macro level, designing new governance institutions, and law has a very big role to play in that. And actually, Jeff Garber can address that fully. And then there's the micro level of aligning individual behavior with the moral economy. And that's the subject that I want to spend a little bit of time talking about. And I want to outline the difficulties of adjusting law to this project, but then talk about some steps that are being taken. The great project of law is to get the individuals, entities, and governments to act within the law. And that's a very worthy project, but it doesn't fit too well with the Moral Economy Project. And let me just outline three problems that you have. Two are general to the legal system, and one is particular to environmental law, although the two general ones exacerbate the environmental problem. The first problem is that we have the long tradition in the Western legal tradition of only sanctioning individual behavior when it harms another individual or society. And we have not had the notion that the hundreds of choices that we make in our lives, consumption and behavior, fall into the category of harms. Now, there's some movement in that direction, but we don't think of driving a car needlessly someplace as a harm. The second problem is that, especially in the last 50 years or so, perhaps longer, really longer, the law has devoted a lot of time to separating law from morality. This is an ongoing debate, but in general, efforts to link law and morality have been seen as residues of intolerant religious beliefs. And so there's been a great move in the name of human dignity and individual liberty to shed law from morality. Now the third relates to environmental law. The main point I want to make is that environmental law, environmental regulation has gone through three stages, really. Now each stage overlaps with the next one, but I think it's useful to think of these three stages. And the first stage is the other stage. That is, when the environmental movement began in the late 1960s, it was primarily focused on large entities, governments and corporations who are polluting. And so you've got a very top-down regulatory behavior. And the only role that individuals were to play in that project were basically to act as supplemental monitors to the government to try to control pollution. Now, for the very first, people usually associated with the ecology movement tried to link environmentalism with individual behavior, but I think both as a political and legal strategy, that kind of thinking was marginalized. And so environmental law became environmental regulation. In the second phase, you might call it the triumph of what I guess we would now call orthodox economics, was an attempt to decentralize, to some extent, environmental protection, rely more on markets, rely on incentives to get major actors to exceed, not simply meet, environmental norms. And still not a great deal of effort to engage the individual. Now, economists did actually try to engage the individual primarily by suggesting that they should be taxed for undesirable behavior, but the idea of taxing people who own large vehicles, etc., never really got much traction. Now we're now entering a third phase, which aligns itself much more with the moral economy project, and that is in environmental law. There is now an attempt to try to engage individuals in the project of environmental protection, and that ultimately asks the question: how do we go about modifying behavior? And first of all, in order to do that, you have to have some basic norm against which behavior can be tested. I think we have a number of ethical formulations now that can serve as that. And many of those have been articulated here and will continue to be articulated here. And that's a very important first step. Then comes the question, how do you go about getting people to internalize them? As I say, for the most part, laws have taken the position, well, that's a function of religion, something else to do that. It's not law's function to do that. And so what does law have to do that? Well, we have a number of techniques. The first, of course, is simply to force people to comply to a new norm, and that's what we've done in the area of human rights and discrimination. The second, again, borrowing from the human rights analogy, is to shame people by disclosing undesirable behavior. It's dicey in the human rights area. Again, not enough shame is, I think, attached to a great deal of environmental or anti-environmental behavior. Then the third thing that we have, and this is the technique that many people are trying to work on now, is information disclosure. And the hope is that when information is disclosed to individuals, that then they'll modify their behavior. Now, there are a number of problems with this, so let me just highlight two. One, there's a lot of research that says, yes, you can disclose information to people, but if they don't like it, they'll reject it. And that's why McDonald's is enjoying record profits. People know the risk of high sugar and high fat, but wherever you go, many places of McDonald's are lines. The second problem is that for many things, we don't really have good information, and good information in the way that can be disclosed to people. As one of the topics here, I think dealing with the hockey playoffs. I have to say, sorry, the Canadians, as I grew up in California, so I don't consider hockey a sport, but that's an aside. A heretical thought here for Canada that I had to express it. But anyway, but there is a great effort underway to do product cycle analysis for all sorts of goods from the time of production to the time of disposal. And we don't. We have efforts at that, but we've got to find ways to communicate them to the general public, and then for people to align behaviors accordingly. But in terms of legal techniques, I would say that ultimately information disclosure and then maybe tying that to more accurate consumer prices are the two techniques that the law is currently focusing on. So Thank you very much.